else are you doing?
How did you have time to do anything?
Oh my God, I don't know.
I'm like, how did you do anything?
Clarissa, thank you so much for just jumping in and
Oh,
helping.
anything for you two. Oh my God.
Oh,
Are
I'm
you
now in
kidding
her
me?
circle of
Oh, I need to pull you in more into my circle.
Oh,
I would love to invite you to LACMA sometime. And
sure.
I just want to,
LA is so easy.
okay, yeah, because
Yeah.
I just have so much I want to ask you.
All right.
And-
Why don't we have a bit of a talk tomorrow? I mean, I also wanted to say something about, developing something, because Southeast Asia is not, Tina and I were talking about this. The idea of Southeast Asia does not fit the Philippines.
No, yes,
At all.
exactly.
And so
Yes.
when you put the Philippines in Southeast Asia, it's like not there.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, it's more like a Pacific Island nation, and we have more in common with Tonga than
Yes, and Mexico. I just think about I mean, I see.
Yeah.
I live in California. The first time I saw Honduras, I was like, holy crap, this is
It's a Latino country.
yeah.
Yeah.
I just Mark probably told you I'm developing an exhibition,
Yes.
and I'm taking my time and trying to be very thoughtful about it.
Yeah.
There you go, Marian. Background. Clarissa, but Marian wants to sit here.
Okay, great.
No, this is you. This is definitely you. Yes, and you just keep.
And so will you just
I'm just here.
Are they on slides, or do you want me just to
It's me again.
I could just go back and forth. Okay.
So what you can do, if you don't want to be seen,
Yeah, I know. Just behind the scenes.
like,
Are we waiting for more people?
yeah.
You have to push the button.
That one. All right. Let's wait for a few more people.
Okay, so if you want to,
I'll sit and face you. So
Yes,
can
yes,
chat.
we're going to do that. We are going to do that.
As you ask me about my childhood.
Yes.
Here, let me move this so you don't.
can you sit in the middle?
Middle.
Middle.
Bit more in the middle,
All right.
just so the angle is okay.
So you're
I'll
here.
take this.
Thank you.
Christina is doing sonography. It's so wonderful that your friends came out here.
My,
Do you want to?
yeah, but Clarissa, if you skip the bio, because it's all pictures of her.
Right.
Unless you want.
Just the dresses. Thank you.
How do we do this so they can't see if you're flipping through?
Well, wait for Tina.
Can you
Give
do
us
it?
a cue.
Can you move it?
Tina, just give us a cue.
Oh yeah, you can mute it.
Can I? Oh, but they can't.
It's here.
Yeah, but then they.
Hard time.
You can. Well, I guess you can just.
I'll just flip through. It's
I
okay.
guess.
Yeah.
Should I flash these or just.
In,
Or you
in
tell
due
me.
course.
Okay, you tell me when.
Yeah.
Here.
I think it's just,
Sorry.
you're still struggling with it.
Sorry. I kind of. Because I wanted to mute it, but then. Sorry, just a bit. It's not on. Why isn't it on?
Ah, there it is.
Oh, yeah. Oh, great.
And I can just.
You have to.
Clarissa, you can't preview it. You can't preview the next slide, so you know what to.
Actually, it can, Clarissa, it can just keep going.
Yeah. I can.
So shall we begin, Christina? Hello. I'm so happy that you're all still here. You are definitely hardcore. It was one of the nerdiest conferences ever. And you are still here. Gluttony for punishment. Right. I am going to atone for my sin of beginning the conference on dreadful notes. I began the conference with war. So, in atonement, we shall end today with a wonderful conversation with a person who has become a dear friend of mine. This had happened fairly recently, how we got together. His name is Mark Higgins. And I do not want to introduce you as the son of Salvacion Lim Higgins. However, because he's an artist on his own, and it would be wonderful to go into your art a little bit towards the end, but the topic of conversation today is the work of his mother. And let me just say a few sentences about Salvacion Lim Higgins. She is, she was granted the stature of National Artist of the Philippines for fashion design. It's rare. There are still human beings in the Philippines who do not think that fashion design deserves to be classified as art. And the fact that Slim was awarded the Order of National Artist makes a big difference. Now, we shall structure, this is not a structured paper or anything, it's a very informal conversation. And we've invited Mark here to bring you into his mother's work. You are going to be seeing photographs of beautiful couture. It's all haute couture. And I'd like you to keep in mind that all of these clothes were made in the
late 1940s to 1990.
So you may actually be shocked that clothes like these were made around the post-war period, all the way to the 1970s and 80s. But some of the ones that are truly avant-garde looking, very sculptural, were actually made almost immediately post-war, right? All right, I'd like to ask you first a few questions about how it was to grow up with this intense fashion designer.
She kind of had a double life. You know, we grew up in a very grounded family. So what she did for work was what she did for work. But when we were at home, she was just mom. She never really brought her work home so much. So we grew up not thinking she was that big a deal. You know, and it was intentional, I think, on her part.
Right, but you did see her work. Constantly. And sort of introduce everyone here into the work that you saw. Give us a year. How old were you?
Well, I think the springboard that's best to start from is contemporary fashion historians now describe the decade from 1947 to 1957 as the golden age of haute couture in Paris, because it was the year that Christian Dior opened his salon, and that's exactly the same year that my mother opened her salon. Manila had just gone through finished the end of World War II. Paris had just finished the end of World War II. So both cities on opposite sides of the world were in a mindset of rebuilding a broken city and a broken society with this vision of what would the future look like? What would the women, after all this devastation, what would the women look like for this new beginning?
That's right. This makes me jump into the actual argument for her becoming national artist. And the argument was, then I can tell you what it was because I argued. I did the argument.
You did the arguing.
Yeah. So the idea that with Manila destroyed, the second most destroyed Allied city on earth, at the end of 1945, you had economic collapse not just for the poor, but all classes of society. So you had upper class women needing to work. So Slim was the fashion designer who helped define that woman who could no longer have 10 maids putting on her barot saya. It was not possible anymore. After the war, even if you were a wealthy woman, you needed to go to, you could go to a fancy, to a posh place, but you still do not have the time to put on barot saya with alampay. That was not possible anymore. So you needed a fashion designer to define that woman who had to present herself to the workforce, to the labor force, as a person who can get in and out of her, project herself without too much fuss, but to make an impact. And if you look at that, at what she was doing, that woman is the woman of post-war Manila. And I'd like you to add to what I just said, because that was the time you were a child, that you were seeing.
Well, I was born not quite at the beginning of her career. I was born in 1963. By the time I was born, she was already a very well-established designer. In fact, she opened the first fashion design school in the Philippines in 1960. Next year, it will be 65 years old. Yeah. So it's the oldest fashion institution in the country.
Slims.
In fact, by the time my sister and I were born, she claimed to the press that she's semi-retired to take care of us, which was a lie, because when we looked at all the press releases, she was constantly busy, even when we were growing up.
So what was her atelier like?
Busy, quiet.
What were people doing with their hands?
Well, my aunts told me, because I asked them a lot of questions, and at about the height of her career, everything was done in-house in those days, which is not the case anymore in the fashion industry in Manila. So there were all kinds of women doing particular tasks, hand finishing, beading.
How many people?
I was told 22.
And many of them were what? They were embroiderers, they were beaders,
They were embroiderers, beaders. There was somebody who did nothing but iron things.
Good heavens.
And the beaders, I'd sit there as a kid and watch them. In fact, I brought some samples to share with you from the archive.
Perhaps we should actually show
Well, I don't know if you guys
the beauties.
See. Some of it will flash on the screen, but
this was what was going on in the atelier. There were women. Were they men and women or women?
No, they were all female.
All right. So why don't you actually?
Can you guys see this?
Well, maybe we should do them just like this. Can you describe what's going on?
One of the techniques they did was they would. Well, it was pre-high-tech days, so my mom would sit there and draw all the motifs of the flowers and things on tissue paper. They would trace them and then transfer the design onto fabric on a it was called a bastidor.
Yes, I do remember.
And then they would start attaching, for those of you in the back, this is a combination of velvet, Swiss straw, and beads. And then they would cut out all the appliques, these flowers, in this particular case, and they would make them by the hundreds, and they would pin it on a dress, and my mom would be the one arranging
let's
it.
show
like something like this.
Which is truly intricate work, and truly reminds me of traditional textiles of the Philippines, the amount of intricacy that's involved in every square inch of the fabrics.
It's the same DNA. I think it's the same ancestral DNA of what everyone's been talking about all day today. It's that craftsmanship and
it's the detail, it's the smallness of scale.
The smallness of scale.
And later we're going to try and see this detail on clothing that is completely sculptural. But I want to get into this because this is quite a beauty. This is so sweet. Could you please describe that?
Well,
it's like peace in a pod.
This is actually very hard to make because it's bias cut, for those of you who are technical, and it's semicircular, so even to attach each starfish thing was a challenge. And there was a
Did you hear that? It's bias. Every single petal is a bias cut cup with the pearls attached inside.
Also, she developed this technique. Beginning in India, the way they do embroidery and beading is with something called a tambour, which the French do in the couture industry in France. In the Philippines, we didn't have those. So what she did was she developed a technique where they removed the presser foot of the sewing machine, so it was just the needle. And the girls would be attaching beads and pearls. And of course, if you were distracted for half a second, you'd lose a finger. But they were very well trained.
So obviously. Otherwise, we'll hear about the fingers.
This one I chose because it kind of got squashed in our binders, but they attached silk flowers and put beads in between them. And
Yes, it's layered. There's beads in between.
because she liked doing very three-dimensional.
As
If
you can
look
see
at some
here.
of the work.
Yeah.
She liked things that, that moved when the woman walked. There were things sticking out. But again, they've been in binders, so they're kind of compressed. And
Yeah.
things like this, they would attach one layer on top of another and pinch them so that they were sticking out.
So they were actually truly three-dimensional. Well, the clothing itself was three-dimensional, but there's these other dimensions. And again, I'd like to point out this was done very early. All right. Are these the end of the little bits that you brought?
That's the end of the little bits.
Yeah, all right. I think you get the picture about the kind of detailing work that was going on in the atelier. But there were other fashion designers, other couturiers who were doing a fair amount of this beadwork. This is different, I'd like to say, because of the determination to be more three-dimensional than three-dimensional. It's just sort of alighting out of the clothing, right?
Yeah.
All right, but if Clarissa's helping us, thank you so very much.
There's some of the plainer ones.
Yes, I'd like to show the sculptural ones, if we could.
It's in the earlier chapter.
Tell me when to stop.
Coming.
Somewhere there.
Complete sculpture
There.
there.
That
And
was
there's-
1960.
This is 1960. It's masterful cutting.
Actually, if you look under the collar of that cape, because we've used it in exhibits, it's full of darts, but it looks very simple.
It's really it doesn't look like there's laboriousness to it,
Yeah.
but if you look in the actual tailoring of the material, then you will see the amount of work that was put in
To look effortless.
to look effortless. So it's like ballet. It glides, but
But your toes are bleeding.
your toes are bleeding. All right. Could we have more sculptural pieces, please?
That one.
There. This one is one of my favorites. Which, if you're thinking about the 1960s, you're also thinking, if you think along horizontal to the other artists who are working during the period, you're talking about the first modernists. So you're talking about Arturo Luz and Lee Aguinaldo and Hoya, Fernando Sobel. And the point has been made that she belongs to that pantheon of Filipino modernists. And you can see that her medium is clothing, but it is contemporary, it's modern sculpture. So I'd like you to tell us a little bit more about when she was making this.
The process.
Yes, the process.
Well, as you can see from these examples, and there's some further back to her, so she also worked with just the fabric on the human form, on a dress form, like this sculpting and molding the fabric and pinning it. A lot of times she actually would cut the dress on the client. In fact, a lot of models didn't like fitting with her for fashion shows because she would keep them there for hours, and then they'd have to keep coming back for fittings. But this is how you achieve this. So even in her school now, which I'm a director of, when I talk to the students, I always try and make them understand to create a garment, or at least of this caliber, you really need to think in 3 dimensions. Because a lot of people who are draftsmen will draw a flat drawing. And then when I look at it, I always say, what does the side look like? And what does that do when it reaches the back? So sort of training them to think, the human being is a 3-dimensional form.
Yeah,
and it
that's
moves.
right. We might forget. Because, the pattern setting is flat.
Yeah. Eventually it is flat, but there's some that never ended up as flat patterns, like the terno on the cover.
All right, let's take a look at this one. Could we have the cover? I'm sorry, Clarissa.
There.
Make you work.
The
There.
terno on the left is now in the Victoria and Albert Museum, by the way. They have 2 of her dresses there.
And please tell us about this, because this cannot have come from a pattern.
No. This was cut out of a single piece of fabric, slashed and draped. There's only one seam in the center back of the dress. And she always used to tell me, the less you cut the fabric, the better the garment is. It's all about the pleating and the tucking to make it. And it's only many years after she passed away, because this was one of her favorites. She talked about this dress because it was very difficult to execute. And it was only years later I read in this tiny clipping in a newspaper, she said it was Malay inspired. Exactly. So I thought, what? But I realized what she meant finally. I was sort
Do
of
tell.
trying to channel the way she thought. It's a sarong, and the wind blows it.
Oh, my goodness.
So the left
You
part
didn't tell me this, really?
so this part of the sarong is pulled toward the waist, and then the flap opens when the wind blows, and so that's what she meant.
Good.
Of course, you'd never look at this and think it was a Philippine or even Southeast Asian, but I think also she wasn't literal with her
And
work.
that is why I really think that she was a modernist, together with all of the modernists of that period, because her concepts were not literal concepts.
They didn't look like costumes.
They were definitely not costumes, so they're not like performing the Philippines, which you're used to with all of the other couture houses. Slims never performed Filipino-ness, but she was an incredible artist. So the idea that I think I'd like you to tease out of your memory is, when did you start realizing that she was doing things with textiles and not exactly sewing them?
Well, I guess being an artist myself, I didn't really question what she did when I saw her. It just seemed like, oh, okay, she's doing that. But so much in hindsight after she passed away in 1990, so much in hindsight even doing this book, there was so much recall on the process and on the temper tantrums when they didn't come out right, because she was a perfectionist.
And had temper tantrums.
temper.
Yes, she had a temper.
The very artistic temperament.
So take a look at this one, Mark. Give us an insight as to how it's constructed. Where does it begin?
Oh, well, there's an undergarment, obviously a foundation garment first. It would have a corset because this was the 1950s. It would have boning, and then you can see the layers of tulle underneath, and then they would build the layers on top of it. So the last layer that you see is draped or molded on top of the figure, and then it's sewn by hand.
So it's draped on the human being
Yeah.
who will wear
The
it.
zipper you can see sewn by hand. It's not machine.
Right. That's the other thing. It's so bespoke that in and out, you do not see anything that is not well done, including buttonholes and selvages. And I'd like you to share with everyone here about those details, the little bits.
Gosh, there's a lot.
Please, let's begin. We have all night.
There's something. there's something that still freaks out my teachers in the school because we use a lot of the dresses as teaching tools for the students. There's something they did called hand rolling. They still do it in India. I think
That's
in
correct,
Paris.
yes. There's a Tagalog term for it. It's escaping me now, but please go on.
So if you imagine the finest weight of silk chiffon, which is mousseline, they would roll it with their fingers into something like a hair so that it's not a raw edge, and then they would sew it with a very fine needle so that you don't see any sewing.
It's all.
And my
Handkerchiefs.
teachers still freak out when they see the dresses with that on it because we teach that in the school, but that scale of
That scale of detail.
fineness.
Tell us a bit about buttonholes.
We still teach those in the school. I can't do them, but I've seen poor students. Yeah, because there's a way you do buttonholes by hand. So if you can imagine what a buttonhole looks like with the thread, but doing that also perfectly symmetrical and flat. They're not bulky like
And
already.
all the same.
And all the same size.
That is what is called bespoke.
And even the hand beading. I mean, there's a dress in this book, if you can find it, the silver terno with the fringes. I was already in college in Canada, and I came back for Christmas holidays.
Could you go back to that part? Again, one more. There. My absolute favorites. Aren't they incredible? Please give us a date.
Well, this, I think, is late 1950s.
Can you imagine?
Because there was a quote that she said in the newspaper when she said, "You can wear my dresses inside out." So when we shot this dress, I told the photographer, let's invert the dress and shoot it like that so that they can see the inside.
Pretty unbelievable. All right, let's go back to the detail. You were wanting something to be shown.
Oh, there was a dress that they were doing that was all hand beaded. It's in the next section, Clarissa.
Clarissa, I really want to thank you very much.
Getting closer. Am I getting closer, Mark?
Yeah.
This one.
No.
Oh.
There. Okay, that turned out to be a terno, which I didn't know, and I'm assuming most of you know what a terno is. I was away in college, and we came back for Christmas holiday, and the woman beading the dress, those are all fringes. She was counting they're called bugle beads, counting so that every strand matched. Then I left after the Christmas holidays, came back for summer vacation. She was still making the dress. Can you imagine? This is a true story. And it's so heavy. I think they eventually didn't give it to the client because it weighs a ton. And the thing is, you can't really tell until you've finished it.
So here you have, we'll open it up for questions, but one final inquiry from me. It seems to me that she began with an idea, and then she would respond to a potential client by trying to understand the person.
Yeah.
The reason I'm asking this is because one of the reasons that people were convinced that she is really national artist is that she didn't design for the woman. She co-designed it with the wearer. Because if you see all of the work, you can't just put this on a person, on a woman who doesn't project this way. It has to be co-created with the wearer. Otherwise, it doesn't work, right?
Then something she always, because I worked with her for several years when I was sort of high school, college age, she always trained me she dressed up her clients according to, yes, their physical attributes and, their good features and the features that you would try to conceal, but she always dressed them according to their personality. Because she would say, oh, so-and-so doesn't have the personality to wear that, but this one can wear this. So this is sort of what Marian's talking about.
Yeah, I want to pursue that so that I can share with you what I was thinking when I was thinking about the National Artist Award. She was dressing a woman who was not a trophy wife. She was not a woman who was an important man's accessory, which was what was happening before the war. Slims was dressing a woman who understood herself, because you simply cannot wear these clothes if you don't understand yourself. And I think that paved the way for the Filipino woman post-war, the 1970s. So can you add to that? Was she conscious that she was doing this, you think?
Yes, I don't think she thought in a particularly linear way and said, oh, I'm dressing up this modern. But what Marian was saying earlier about her being a modernist was true, because her mindset was always on the latest, most interesting shape or textile or color or whatever. She was far more interested in the friends who were our age and what they were thinking than women who were her age. She was always interested in young artists, which is, I guess, why she opened the school. She always wanted to know what young, creative people thought. And she'd travel periodically, or we'd travel, and she'd look at all the fashion trends and look at all the latest things, to the point where at a certain age I was surprised that she would look at certain fashions, even punk. She was already probably in her 60s. So my age, in other words. But,
That's right.
But she looked at some of my friends all in spikes, and she thought it was really interesting. You kind of don't think of a mom
that way.
That way.
All right, so he grew up differently, I guess. I'd like to open the floor to questions from you. Is there anything you'd like to ask Mark? Because he certainly had an interesting childhood and adulthood. You stayed with your mother until she passed.
The very end.
Until the very end. Any questions about craftsmanship, about couture? Yes.
I think you've answered it, but I'm curious, like, did she ever look to, like, since our conference is on a lot of, like, traditional textiles of Southeast Asia, did she look to those for inspiration, or even the students today?
Sandra and I were talking about this earlier. There was I suppose you could call it a movement, where they were trying to promote asking designers to not forget local materials. And of course, for high fashion garments, you only had two. You had Husi and Piña. The sort of the native, the more indigenous weaves and the cuts, not so much, because that wasn't fashionable at that period
And they weren't available.
in time.
Yeah.
There was a press article I read, which Sandra also saw, where my mom was, and I know this story, my mom actually my grandmother was still in Legazpi, because that's where we're from, and she was having weavers do Husi fabric, and my grandmother would dye the fabric herself because she was particular about colors and things, and they were doing the sinuksok,
Yes.
the weft,
Supplementary weft
inserts
float.
with designs. And then she sent these fabrics to my mom, and she was using it for clients. I think that what happened is because these fabrics are so fragile, there are not a lot of specimens
That are
have
available.
survived.
Yes.
And also, I think she did it on a made-to-order basis. I don't think she didn't use them in her fashion shows so much. It was, because she also dressed up a lot of the first ladies and their daughters, and of course they had to wear this. In fact,
Yeah.
there's one Husi dress that belonged to Linda Garcia, the first daughter
of
in the late
President
1950s.
Garcia of the 1950s.
And there's one dress made of Husi that's now in the Smithsonian. Thank God, because it's well preserved.
All right. Let's talk about drapery.
The dress on the left is something that's very typical of the work she would do, because we also teach this in our school. And my mom always she liked things that looked very spontaneous, that didn't look so.
Yeah.
She always would say, it looks too studied. So if you look at the way the fabric is draped on the dress on the left, it looks almost spontaneous, like a Greek statue. Whereas if you compare it to somebody like Valentino Garavani, when he was still working, the draping that the House of Valentino did was very even, very fine, but very even pleats. This is the opposite. It looks like she just took the fabric but this took boxes and boxes of pins, because my sister and I would then collect them on the floor of the shop with a magnet. And
With
fill
a
up the
magnet.
boxes again, yeah.
Oh my goodness. I'd like to invite Sandy Castro to join this conversation. And what are your insights on Slim?
So I remember in the 30s, there was a National Economic Protection Association.
NEPA.
It was called NEPA, and they were encouraging locals to use native textiles because they wanted to reduce the number of imported textiles. But of course, in the long
But that
run-
carried on, that NAPA organization,
Yeah.
because in the 1952, my mom did a fashion show. But by then, the locally produced textiles were not just Husi or she was using upholstery and mosquito net. There's a double spread, with all the
Oh, let's look at the
in the
mosquito net.
biography part.
Am I going the right way?
Yeah.
My God, you have the book memorized by the page.
Well, yeah.
Tell me when to
Because
start.
actually,
Keep going.
the butterfly sleeves were initially they were made of abaca, that was starch, but later on it was like mosquito net, it's imported. It's made of nylon, it's a net.
Oh, the nylon
It's towards the
mosquito net.
beginning, Clarissa.
Oh,
In the bio part.
it's in the beginning?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, sorry.
There's some.
Sorry for the flipping back and forth.
Yeah,
But-
we don't have preview.
Yeah, but we simply have
Keep
to
going.
we simply have to see
No.
the mosquito net.
It's a double spread.
A double spread, no less.
The older
There. Okay, so the.
ones were made of abaca.
Oh, it's not here. I'm sorry.
Yeah, the older ones were made of abaca, but then later on, the industrial.
I know where it
companies
is.
know what the local people want, so they offer a textile
Just keep going
that's
forward to
cheaper
the
but
textured part.
mass-produced.
It's there. I just remember.
So they imitate
In the texture part.
the abaca.
They imitated the abaca.
Yeah.
How interesting. And when was
They were made of Swiss net.
Betil.
Batil?
Yeah,
That's
because
correct.
Sandy and I worked together on a book we did on the national dress, and she wrote the glossary of all the Philippine textiles.
Yeah, so the Swiss, the Americans, they
Sorry,
provide
back,
this
Clarissa.
I missed it?
net type of
There.
fabric
Whoop.
that you
There.
can easily use
Oh,
for
I
the
see.
butterfly sleeve.
All right. And was this used by other couturiers?
Yes. Also.
I see. All right.
It's kind of a longer story. What was used for terno sleeves. It goes
Could we go through it between you and Sandy?
In
This
a
is an
nutshell.
opportunity.
In
This is
a
an
nutshell.
opportunity for all
Are
of
you guys
us.
familiar with the national dress, the butterfly? Okay. It began with a generic word called nipis.
Which Sandy
which
wrote
was-
about.
Which was made of abaca sometimes, or anything that
Pineapple.
was fine and heavily starched.
Right.
And then there were other words like baraswain and kanyamazo, which lasted until
Yes.
the 50s and 60s.
Actually, cañamasa is a Spanish word. It's referred to as like sackcloth. So it's a low fabric. But because they want in the 20s, they want to be stiff.
To be stiff.
Stiff and flat. That's when the 1920s is when the terno sleeve became what we recognize as flat, because before that it was voluminous. So it was the 1920s that it flattened, and by my mom's period, around 1950, we're not sure why. Before that, the sleeves were always transparent, made out of some kind of mesh or netting. But by my mom's time onward, they covered the sleeves for the first time with the same fabric as the dress.
Right.
We never found a reason
They also-
why.
Sometimes they also use lace,
Yeah,
machine-made lace, to cover the net fabric.
yeah.
Yun. That's right.
Yeah,
We
there was also a time they did a lot of machine embroidery on the sleeves.
the 1920s when the embroidery machine was invented. And then in our book, what happened is these workshops or ateliers would create all these motifs on the sleeve. Then they would send the sleeves to Manchester, England, here. I was asking someone to help me find that out, actually. Then they would create a textile print to match the sleeves and ship it back to the Philippines.
Right.
There were 2 textile companies in Manchester that did that,
Yeah, there
apparently.
were 2 different periods. At first, they would buy the British textiles that were printed, and then they would embroider that pattern on the sleeves and the panuelo. But then later on,
It went the other way.
reverse.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about the reverse. Later on, it was sent to Manchester for the actual pattern,
Printing.
for the printing.
The cotton
And then,
skirt
and the skirt as well.
for the skirt.
And this lasted until 1930, the war.
No, because I think it was maybe the 30s. I tried to ask some of the V&A people here, but they drew a blank.
I see.
But if somebody wants to do research on that,
That's certainly a nice
be
little
glad.
area. Can we talk about the 2 works of your mother that are at the V&A? So one you saw.
one you saw. Sorry, just go back, Larissa, before we switch.
Am I going the right way?
No.
Sorry.
By the time it's over, you would have seen the whole book.
Back.
Okay,
It just,
the middle dress is made out of mosquito net, and the red one, which the woman still had and sent it to me, was made out of upholstery. So I think she was just showing off how resourceful she could be.
yeah, that is a designer showing off, right? Yeah, upholstery material. Was it heavy?
No. No, it wasn't. It was probably curtain weight. I saw the dress, and the embellishments on the red dress are tigbe seeds. I don't know what that is, but
Do you know tigbi? Tinitigbi. It's a tree that has this like Job's tears.
she had
Yeah.
a jeweler drill holes in the seeds, and she used them on the dress.
Red or white? They're brown.
Brown.
Tigbi is brown. It's actually the seed that gives us the metaphor, tigbi-tigbi ang luha. That is where the metaphor comes from. Lynn,
Larissa, you
you,
can go backwards again.
This way.
Lynn has a question.
This is fascinating. Again, not my area, but I'm wondering, and it really is of interest. So I'm looking at the designs that you just showed. So were these produced for an export or a Western
No.
market, or it doesn't seem so. Were they reproducing a Western style of dress, but for Philippine women? And then I'm thinking, at what point was it comfortable to introduce more beading or more, like, I'm looking at Western styles versus Filipiniana, and was there a time that she felt confident that women are ready to have really Filipiniana, but in the 30s and 40s, was it looking more Western? I'm
I think
off base.
it's semantics, but there are 2 answers. One of them is the Philippines has always been a melting pot, a hybrid culture. So long before the Europeans came and colonized that part of the world, because of the superpowers at the time, the Srivijaya and the Majapahit Empire, the archipelago was so used to trading and wearing foreign styles and textiles. You've seen it earlier with one of the speakers on the Boxer Codex and things like that. So to absorb Paris fashion and merge it with the national dress was second nature. It's in the DNA of the people. The second part of the answer is, at the time, the Americans were the great liberators of the country at the time. So there was a big expat community there. But my mom was dressing up both the locals and the expats. They were never done for exports. She did pretty much one-offs.
I think your answer clarified my question. I knew it was an export, but that's what I meant, so thank you.
No, in fact, there's a woman who has several photos here, Carlin Manning, who was one of the original expats who came out, she said, just after the war had ended, she was a war bride. And she lived in the Philippines all her life and died at the age of probably in her 90s.
In her 90s,
And she was a
yes.
client all her life, and she kept all her dresses. And she was an American. And she gave me back some of them, actually, which are now in our school.
Right. So she is the only couturier in the Philippines who had a school. So I'd like Mark to tell us about the school.
Okay, there were dressmaking schools as early as, from what we saw, like the 1920s, 1910s, 1920s was a big period for Singer sewing machines. They became
Remember?
more modern. So it was the rise of dressmakers. Now, there's a sort of fine line both in Europe and the Philippines between a dressmaker, what they call a modiste, and a fashion designer. In Paris, there were a lot of dressmaker brands, but the rise of the name designer is accredited to Charles Worth. And in the Philippines, a similar thing happened. So there were already dressmaking schools that started as early as the 1920s. Arti Paras's mother.
Arti Paras. That's
opened.
right, yes.
But as far as for my research, my mom was the first one who opened a fashion school that didn't just teach you how to make dresses, it taught you how to design them as well.
Yes, so Slims is of great interest to me personally because to this day, while it had produced some of the most striking fashion designers of the last 30 years, can you name the designers that came out of your school?
Well, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar again with Philippine designers. The big rock star is Michael Cinco. He's from the school. The earlier ones were people like Cesar Gaupo. The younger ones would be people like Joey Sampson, people like that. I would say about between 60 and 70% of all the fashion designers from 1960 to present day are graduates of that school. And
Oh.
also, it's a very diplomatic school. It wasn't an expensive school. It's modular. It doesn't have semesters. So you get all kinds of people enrolling.
And I'd like you to talk about that topic a little bit more. The range of students and how the school allows this range.
Well, because it's by modules, so you can start and stop whenever you want. There's no school year, and you can take as many or as little courses as you want, because a lot of the people that enrolled in the history of the school are not from the more affluent economic backgrounds. Some of them come from remote provinces, and they rent a room or a space in Manila, and they enroll in the school, and when they're finished, they go back to their provinces. And it's also structured in such a way that when you finish the courses, you're a one-man army. You can make your own. You can set up your own business by yourself.
Could we go into that a little bit more? You can set up shop. You know how to do what?
You can cut, sew, drape, make patterns, do tailoring, if you do all the courses, and draw
Draw and make buttonholes.
and make buttons.
I love the buttonhole part, as you can see. And do this? Can you would know this?
Unfortunately, this is something we don't teach. I wanted to, but it's not an easy task to find somebody who can teach this. You would have to train them first.
Pity. It seems like this is something the Filipinos can do very well.
Well, they're beginning.
Don't
I
you-
see a lot of websites and Instagram posts where people are doing, we're returning back to our DNA and doing this fine work again, because I think in the grand scheme of things, the Philippines will never be a mass production kind of country. It will be bespoke, artisanal level of stuff, which it was
It is glorious.
before. I think it's just in the DNA of the Filipinos.
All right. Is there any other question? Oh, many. I like many questions. Yes.
Just going back to the V&A, the dresses at the V&A. So actually I tried to, so I was fortunate to have one of my lecturers in Mexico when I studied textile conservation. She was the former head of conservation of the V&A.
It's supposed to be one of the best schools for textile conservation in Glasgow. Do you live in Manila?
No, she just finished her.
Do you need a job?
Yes, he has a job.
They're opening a fashion museum in Manila, and they need conservators.
Yes.
Seriously.
Very seriously. We're both on the board. Yeah, all right. So what was the question?
So going back to the V&A dresses, so I tried to ask if I could go see the dress.
No. The dresses are in their archive. The way fashion or costume museums work is you cannot display a garment permanently. It's impossible. There's several elements that will destroy it. And you know the term if you studied conservation.
Well, actually, my lecturer said that normally they would allow like people, researchers, or actually even for
Yeah, they'll open the drawer and show it to you.
So I tried, but unfortunately these days the V&A is in the
Well,
process
it's
of
not.
moving
Yeah, it's moving.
between
Yeah.
buildings. So
Yeah.
it hasn't been possible. Although I got as far as, because I visited the studio several times. I have a few friends there. And then I got to see the photos, at least, so I was able to identify which ones. Because initially I didn't know which particular dresses were in there. Because there
It's
were
the one the gray one,
Yeah.
and there's a white one,
the
Clarissa.
white one with the gold flower.
Yes, that one.
Yeah, because they don't have the photos displayed on the website.
No, they don't. In fact, I complained to them because I said I gave you all the background because the white dress belonged to one of our first ladies in the late 1950s, and they always want to know the provenance of the clothes. That one.
This is pretty beautiful. All right, there was a question here. Yes.
Mine's a bit, so you don't need to answer if you don't want to. To preface, but
Good save.
I think you were saying that your mother was always working, and she obviously took so much pride in what she does. And to be transparent, I actually don't have much knowledge about Sion up until my cousin invited me today. And it's so fascinating to know all of these, like the history of the channel, for example. But I suppose it must have been a lot of pressure for her to be the first of and also an artist.
No, I mean, one thing to bear in mind is the world in her time and when I was my childhood was not as harsh. It wasn't as overpopulated. You didn't have that much competition. That pressure is something that's sort of more recent.
Well, there were a handful of.
I mean, there was pressure in terms of deadlines, finishing, dresses for fashion show, finishing a wedding gown on time and that. But in terms of always being outstanding, I mean, I think it was just the normal, friendly sort of competition between other top names. But I don't think I'd use the word pressure. I mean, the only times we would see her explode is when a dress didn't come out the way she wanted, or if someone didn't do it the way she asked them to.
Sandy has a question.
Now, Mark, tell them about who the competitors were. Wasn't she the only woman at a certain...
Well, again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about dressmakers versus fashion designers. So from the 1920s onward came the fashion designer. So by the time, but of course the war interrupted everything. There was a fashion designer who was the first national artist,
Valera.
Ramon Valera, whose career was pre-war. So it was like the late 1930s. And he was very old school. I'm trying to think of a polite description.
Oh, he was quite marvelous.
He was.
It was elegant.
But they sort of were snottier in Manila society pre-World War.
That's true.
She represented the young, another generation,
Well, she represented
and
the
she was
woman.
female,
And she was female.
and yet she was very edgy. So he didn't quite know what to make of her.
Right.
But he considered her friendly competition, and apparently he considered her the only one who was on his level.
Yeah.
Because when she proclaimed to the press that she was going to retire to take care of her two little kids, she told me he called her up and said, "What are you doing? Don't close." So,
All right. There were other questions. I saw a lot of hands. May I see the hands again? questions? You have one.
You mentioned your grandmother, right, helping with the house of the dying and
Yeah.
supplying some of these weaves. So I guess my question is, how did your mom get started in this, right? This
I think if I get the story correct, she hated sewing, by the way. She told me. She had an older sister, and when they were in the province, my grandmother already was making dresses and things, as a lot of Victorian women did, because they weren't allowed to go to, they didn't go to college. So my grandmother was already cutting dresses and doing embroidery and things, and taught my mom's eldest sister. And I think what happened is they lost so much after the war. The house was destroyed in Legazpi, etc., that it was their way of starting a new life. So this older sister of hers said, "Why don't we go to Manila and open a dress shop?" And I think that's really how it began.
I am very pleased about your question, Cherry, because it is Bicol. It is Abaca. And we've been talking about Abaca the entire afternoon. And so there is this link. It did begin with Abaca in Bicol, with your
My
grandmother.
that was his business.
Oh, there you go. All right. Now, please tell us about grandfather.
Copra. Isn't Copra?
No, Abaca
He
is what we're
did
talking.
rope.
Oh, he did rope. All right. A little bit more.
My grandfather was pure Chinese from Amoy, which is now Xiamen. He was the son of his father was a ship chandler, so they were in the business of repairing and replacing parts for ships. So when my grandfather came to Legazpi, he got into the business of making rope, which I imagine they also used for ships, because it's a port city. So there's
Right.
your connection.
So that's Abaca. That's actually Manila hemp for ships. I'd like to go into one final topic because it's late now, if you don't mind.
No, I don't mind.
Your mother is, I think, quite unusual also because she went to fine arts school. So tell us a little bit more about it. Her education was fine arts.
She studied, she hated sewing, as I said. She wanted to be a painter. So she came to Manila and studied at UST, University of Santo Tomas, and her teacher was Carlos Francisco, who's now a national artist for art.
Yeah.
And I had no idea who this man was when I was growing up, but she would talk about him to me. And she said that he would comment on her unusual penchant for colors, which I agree with, because if you see her work, the color is, in fact,
she
in the
has a
school
fine sense of
curriculum,
color.
for the fashion design program, the first module is very heavy on fine art and color theory and color balance and things. I think it's from her background as a fine artist. And then what happened is the war broke out. She had to go back to the province. They hid in the mountains for 2 years, and by the time the war ended, I think she was already too old to continue schooling, so they opened Slims. So
There's a question here.
I was just wondering, we've been talking about traditional textiles throughout pretty much the whole conference, but I wonder if there's a place for that, or how you fit it into the curriculum of Slims, or you thought about how to do that. Just wondering if you approached it that way.
That's a long answer, but let me try. A lot of people have asked us over the years about traditional textiles and things. It depends on the textile. The problem with a lot of the more indigenous weaves, as all of us are experts on, they're not stable because they're hand woven. There's no quality control, which is fine because you can use them for bespoke level clothing, but also they're not what you would call a fashion fabric. I mean, the Husi and Pini are a different category because they're the finer ones, but if we're talking about the more indigenous weaves, the tinalaks, and I see a lot of designers struggling in Manila trying to use things like Inabel. It just doesn't work. Like the fabrics need to be developed further to become more fashion garments, because inevitably you end up with a collection of clothes that look like you would buy them in a tourist shop. They don't look like something a foreigner would come to Manila and say, "Oh my God, this is beautiful. I can wear this in Paris or New York." You know, there's something missing that I think we're still playing catch up to.
Well, I think that needs to be said, and I'm glad for the question, that there is a lot of development work that's still, it's a long way ahead, I think.
Because if you look at the textiles of India, you know, there's so much tradition, and it's such a huge country that there's so many different specialities, but also they're beautiful fabrics that you know, European and all kinds of designers use. Whereas Philippine fabrics,
Well, many of them were not made for clothes. I mean, many of them were made for death blankets and blankets. And
that's another interesting
yeah,
point.
so
because
it's really not for clothes.
then people ask me sometimes why piña barongs tear so easily on men. And I always remind them barongs, when they were made of piña, were not fitted. It was a different period of time. So you have to kind of keep that stuff in mind.
Thank you. I think we have time for a couple of questions, and then that's it for the night. Any other? This is an unusual situation. I don't think Mark's ever been in a conference like this. So this is your chance. Yes.
So the just the beads, the 2 beads,
Mm-hmm.
when that was super heavy, is it just because you couldn't sit down in that thing?
Are
Or
you talking about the dress? I was
the
talking
one that was like in seasonal that she was still counting?
What happened, it's a good question, because before, this dress was made in the early 1980s. Up until about the mid-70s, you know, we had a lot of stock of beads. The beads were made of glass, and they weighed a ton. And they crack. That's what that dress was made of. Now, a lot of the beads and sequins synthetically look like glass, but they're plastic or acrylic. They don't weigh as much. But that's a good question. You can barely even wear it. It weighs a ton.
All right. So there are ideas that are simply ideas.
Yeah. But
Right.
sometimes you have to carry them to fruition.
You have to go
see them through.
That's right, to see what happens. Final question. There's a question. Clarissa, with thanks.
My pleasure. I know that Mark is also an artist, and my question
I'm
is
sorry, I
that-
almost
Oh,
forgot.
no.
Sorry.
No, my question is, how has it been growing up in the home of Slims, who was trained as an artist, who created clothing as an artist creates any kind of artwork, and the clothing was her medium? How did that influence your work?
You know, I didn't think about it for a very long time, but I realized in later years in life, the one thing she taught me is how clothing and textile can form just as powerful a narrative as any other artistic medium. Clothing and textile can also tell a story. So the work that I do is a lot of narrative paintings based on what they're wearing and the textiles and the prints on their garments.
All right, and thank you for the question. And it does give me a final opportunity to open some pages of this book, which is a book of Mark's own artworks.
Oh.
Oh, it's random. Would you like? It's all.
No, I mean,
It's completely
I wonder if they're better off just
random.
coming here and looking at them. Can you guys see this?
If you can't see it, you're invited by Mark to come around.
Some of them.
There's textile, right?
There's a,
Some of them actually have textiles, and some of them are painted on.
so this is Mark's own work. Let's do another random flip.
Mark has kindly donated those 2 books to the SOAS library.
Yeah, so they're in the library.
You can flip through them.
All right. We'll keep them here for about 10 minutes, and we'll close the day. Thank you so very much. It's been an incredible day.